There are nights in Cheyenne Mountain when it feels like the granite itself is breathing. You'd think 1,000 meters of rock overhead would smother every sense of life, but the air carries its own pulse down here, dry and metallic, with the faint tang of scorched plastic and powdered stone. Past midnight, the temperature drops just enough for condensation to run in fine silver threads down the conduit sheathing, collecting into beads that cling for a second before slipping onto the tiles below. You feel the weight differently at that hour. Sometimes I tell myself it's the pressure of every missed warning, every late alert fossilized in the rock. Other times, I blame the coffee. The alert came in at 0147 hours. Most of the civilian contractors had cleared out hours earlier, leaving chairs pushed back at odd angles, a scattering of paper printouts, coffee mugs with the skin of cold oil on the surface. It had that abandoned mid-thought look, like they'd meant to come back in 5 minutes and never did. I was 4 hours behind on the weekly situation report, half reading without absorbing, when Celito's voice cut through the hum of fans and the occasional click of a relay. "Colonel Reeve, I've got something off JWST's back-end buffer. You want eyes on it?" He didn't need to ask. I set the report aside, wiped my palm down the rough, industrially laundered fabric of my pants, and crossed the ops bay. Someone had strung a thick braid of data cables from the thermal imaging console to the mainframe. No one's idea of regulation wiring, but in Cheyenne, protocols bent daily. Down here, the difference between classified and unsecured could come down to minutes and nerves. Celito's display looked like someone had etched code into black glass. Dense spikes, tangled overlays, the kind of raw readout you only stared at this long when something didn't match any of your mental templates. He was 10 years younger than me, with the kind of sharpness that makes enemies. People said he'd been fast-tracked after the old tear containment, but that was one of those classified anecdotes you didn't ask about unless you were looking to lose clearance. "This isn't a solar flare," he said, narrowing the scale with a flick of his stylus. "Look at the waveform. You ever see anything hold like that from a stellar source?" He was right. Most natural events rose and fell in a smooth curve. This one climbed almost vertically, leveled for nearly 40 seconds, then fell off a cliff. Edges like that don't happen without intent. "What's the cross-reference?" I asked. He overlaid the thermal data, the radio spectrum, the magnetometer readings. The whole thing should have lit up if it was a solar event. Instead, only the infrared spike burned through the noise, like a flare for the blind. "It's not a ghost," Celito said, his voice quieter now. "Every high-gain scope with a vector on Alpha Centauri B saw it. Multiple confirmations. No comms artifacts. No system lag." I leaned in, staring at the data. Could be a weapons test. Fusion detonation. His jaw didn't move, but I saw his fingers tighten around the stylus. Not at that scale. And there's this. He switched to the real-time buffer. "I've been running analysis on the post-burst scatter. Secondary event 3 hours later. Farther out. See that? That's structural wreckage, Colonel." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. By 0300, I'd brought in 3 more analysts and patched through to Grigg on the secure line. I could picture him in his quarters, sitting upright in the battered recliner he'd salvaged after the wreck, the outline of an old sidearm wedged into the cushions. "Send it up," he said flatly. "Space Force will want confirmation before anyone panics." "No, sir." But the debris was turning, slowly, predictably, like something under deliberate control. If it was an accident, it was a very orderly one. When I stepped outside for air against protocol, no one stopped me. The perimeter was silent. The sky was a clean, depthless black, packed with stars so dense they looked ready to wink out in a single breath. Once I'd taken comfort in that. Now it felt like looking down the bore of a loaded gun. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted. Even the contract janitor was moving differently, rolling his cart past the badge checkpoint with his shoulders tucked in. In the rec room, 2 comms officers sat hunched over a chessboard, missing a piece. Their conversation died as I walked in, eyes flicking from my uniform to the muted news feed crawling across the wall. Tensions in the South Pacific, record heat in Europe, small systems failures blamed on sunspots. Nothing about Alpha Centauri. I palmed my office door open, dropped into my chair. The walls were lined with old reports in mismatched fonts, a history of changing software and shifting priorities. On the desk, the stubborn tick of the analog clock, a gift from a friend 3 years dead. I scrolled through the raw telemetry, 40 seconds of anomaly flattened into columns of numbers. Near the tail, I caught a small spike in the microwave background. Too minor to be flagged, but enough to make me distrust the baseline. I tagged it for later. The first image came through just before 0400. The AI stitching was ugly, but the shape was there, a twisted arc, edges ragged where light scattered off protrusions. Shadows ran the curve. It was almost architectural, like part of a bridge or ring, adrift in deep space. The metadata filled in what the pixels couldn't. Millions of tons moving outward at a crawl compared to orbital speeds. Not flung by an explosion, leaving slowly with deliberate force. Something broken, moving where nothing should be. The rest of the shift blurred into encrypted calls, fragmented after-action notes. I signed off the priority alert, routed it through triple encryption, told Silido to get some sleep. He didn't even nod. By 0600, the mountain was stirring. Contractors filed in with badges clutched like talismans. Above ground, the sun was cutting sharp gold across the Rockies. Down here, the light was only the flat glow of monitors and the cold blue strip running the corridor. In the sink beside the server room, I rinsed my hands and watched the swirl vanish down the drain. My reflection in the steel backsplash looked older than yesterday. I tried for sleep in my quarters, boots stacked by the cot, toothbrush scraping under the buzzing fluorescent. But my mind circled back to the broken arc, tumbling too slowly for nature. When sleep finally came, it was shallow and unsatisfying. I woke to the shuttered sunlight creeping across the floor and the red-lettered message from General Grigg, Pentagon, immediately. Colorado Springs to DC isn't a quick hop, but I barely remember the flight. The hours passed in a haze of secure documents and worst-case scenarios, none of them fitting neatly into the frame of what we'd seen. Around me, the Air Force officers in pressed blue studied their own screens with the same strained focus. A State Department attaché sat across the aisle, suit still showing fold lines from the package. Next to me, a private with a fresh haircut worked the clasp of his wristwatch until I thought it would snap. No one spoke. You could feel it in the air. Every person on that plane was on some flavor of urgent business they couldn't talk about. The convoy rolled us up to the Pentagon just after sunrise. The morning air clung thick and wet, DC's summer already leaning toward oppressive. From the back seat, the building looked unreal, angles too sharp, proportions too exact, like it had been designed for paranoia. Security was tighter than I'd ever seen. 3 separate badge checks before we even reached the inner corridors. The guards studied my ID like it was a riddle. She was waiting just outside the SCIF, a tall woman in a plain suit, hair pinned back, heels clicking in a cadence too precise to be casual. "Mallory," she said, "NSA." No small talk. She turned and set off, and I followed her through the Pentagon's labyrinth of identical corridors and numbered doors. Even after years of briefings here, the place still felt like a puzzle box, a maze built as much to disorient as to protect. The conference room was already loaded. Grigg sat at the head of the table, shoulders hunched, uniform pressed sharp enough to show the creases when he moved. Space Force and NORAD officers, a few from State, and 2 black-badged types I didn't need to ask about. The pot of coffee in the center was already half empty. Grigg didn't bother with ceremony. "We're on a clock, Mason. You're up." I ran them through the timeline, the initial burst, the 40-second plateau, the secondary event, the arc-shaped object drifting outward. I kept it clinical, stripped of speculation. My own unease stayed in the subtext. Colonel Davis from Space Force was the first to break in. If this was a kinetic event, we'd see debris scattering at escape velocities. This thing's not behaving like wreckage. "It's decelerating deliberately," I said. "Nothing we know of in that region can do that without guidance. And it's big. Mass is in the millions of tons." That was when Mallory spoke. Her tone was precise, words chosen like she was editing them mid-sentence. "There's another consideration. The quantum relay array, a ripple of unease moved around the table. I'd seen the array myself, buried under Peterson's Space Force base, locked inside shielding layered in synthetic diamond and lead. A forest of cable and chilled superconductors designed for one purpose: quantum-entangled communications, instantaneous contact anywhere with a paired receiver. The pitch was a diplomat's dream, a spy master's nightmare. If the object is engineered," she said, "and capable of receiving or transmitting, we can initiate contact, shape the narrative." Colonel Davis gave her a flat look. "Or wave at something we don't understand." That cracked the room open. State wanted Allied coordination. Space Force wanted to position assets for a show of strength. The intelligence pair stayed silent, watching the rest of us like we were specimens in a jar. Grigg cut it off. "DEFCON 3. Assume the major powers have this on their boards already. Mason, intent. If it's artificial, it's damaged but not fleeing. It's maneuvering slowly, deliberately. That suggests purpose, not panic." Davis leaned forward. "Timeline until it could interact with anything in system?" "At current speed, decades. But if it's altering course, that's intent, not drift. Davis finished. That was when my secure device vibrated. Message from Silito. Anomaly in comms logs. He patched me into a quick line, his voice low. He'd been combing through the relay's silent test runs and found feedback. Deep space anomalies in sync with our quantum pulses. When we run the array, he said, something out there's answering before we even aim a signal. Back in the room, I laid it out. The Ark wasn't just listening, it was reacting. The temperature in the room seemed to shift a degree colder. We were down to under 24 hours before a decision. Two options emerged. The first, a simple mathematical greeting, clean of any hidden data. The second, an NSA payload hidden inside, ostensibly a non-destructive probe designed to slip inside whatever system was on the other end. That was the polite phrasing. In reality, it was a weapon of curiosity, one we couldn't guarantee wouldn't be read as hostile. After the meeting, Grigg caught me in the hallway. His voice dropped. If we wait too long, someone else will act first. I carried that with me back to my office, stared at the blinking cursor on the relay terminal like it was a trigger. Every scenario was a coin flip, and both sides were bad. When the call came to execute, the relay was already primed. Superconductors at temperature, entanglement stable, packet queued. The greeting was all prime numbers and timestamps, something any intelligent system could decode as intentional. Buried in it, if NSA's engineers had done their work, was the payload. I pressed the key. Transmission time, under 2 seconds. Confirmation, uplink successful. For half a breath, I thought maybe that was it. Then the alarms went off. On the deep space feed, the Ark split open along its length like a seed pod under pressure. Not debris, deployment. Dozens, then hundreds of small constructs spilled into the void, each tracing precise arcs through the outer system. A net flung wide. Within minutes, they began transmitting, not in any language we could parse, but in data structures shaped like our own packets, bouncing entangled pulses through deep space. They were rewriting the background noise of the solar system. Grigg's voice came over the secure line, gravel thick. You see it? We see it. We'll get answers, he said, or we'll get new questions. Either way, it's too late for silence. The feed kept updating, each point of light a deliberate move on a board we couldn't see. And all I could think was, we had made the first move. Whatever came next was theirs. 6 months after the transmission, I'm not wearing a uniform anymore. The badge they issued me for the inquiry was red, the kind you hand back when they're finished with you. I keep it in the same drawer as my father's watch and a coin from my first overseas posting. The mountain hasn't called for me since, but the sky hasn't stopped. Now you don't need a telescope to see them. On a clear night, even in the city's haze, the lights are there. Thin, deliberate lines sliding between the stars, slow-moving knots drifting across familiar constellations. At first, people called them satellites. That lasted about a week. The scientists on TV, no longer oddities invited between weather segments, use phrases like extrastellar infrastructure and non-terrestrial mesh. Governments have their own names, each one a subtle calibration of fear. On the street, no one bothers naming them at all. I walk the frost-bitten trails above town to watch them. Sometimes they hold position for days, Sometimes they shift in patterns too exact to be random. And sometimes, on nights when the air is knife-sharp and still, I see something impossible. An aurora ghosting along the horizon, blue-green and slow, in a place where no aurora should be. Mallory's people vanished into new agencies with names that change every month. Special contingencies, strategic contact, joint response. The acronyms pile up like sediment. Grigg retired early. The official line is health, but I remember the way his hands would trace the edge of a briefing folder when the room went too quiet. Saito writes from Geneva now, where he's working under a coalition mandate. His emails are half-coded, each line careful, but the subtext never changes. We are not in control. 3 months ago, the first direct transmission arrived. Not language, not anything we could fit into a dictionary, but a sequence of images and data sets. Orbital trajectories, magnetic field diagrams, geometric shapes that pulse in time with the rhythm of our own comms tests. Every major power claims to have decoded part of it. None have shared what they found. The Red Line Protocol is no longer a relic locked in a vault. It's the one constant every government observes now. There are protests in the cities, panic buying in the suburbs, entire new religions claiming the lights are sentinels. Others call them invitations. And yet, I've seen footage of astronauts from rival nations standing shoulder to shoulder at a viewport, backs to the camera, staring out at an arc of slow-moving lights drifting past the station. For the first time in years, there's no talk of war, only survival, and the question no one can answer. What kind of neighbor do we become when someone moves in next door? I keep my log. Every night I fill another page in the small notebook, the letters crowding the margins as though I can pin the world down with words. Sometimes I tune the radio to the static between stations and listen for patterns that shouldn't be there. Above it all, the mesh is thickening. The lines link point to point, pausing, shifting, reforming. Some turn inward toward the sun. Some pivot outward into deep space. They are always moving, always watching. Part of me still waits for a message meant only for us, something that will cut through the noise and give shape to all of this. A phrase, a number, a single unambiguous reply. But maybe that isn't coming. Maybe this is the reply. The Watchers are here, and we are among the watched. Tonight, the air is cold enough to bite through gloves. I stand in the dark with my breath clouding in front of me, head tilted back until my neck aches. The lights are there, patient, deliberate, sketching invisible diagrams in the black. For a moment, I swear they shift in answer to me, as if they know I'm here, looking. The world has changed its orbit. We are no longer alone. And this time, at least, we're watching back.